Tak, nie. Po jednym zdaniu. Człowiek może wychodzić z siebie.
Witam Państwa.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another panel on the conflict with the EU. What should be the priorities? Where are our wins? My guests are Jan Maria Rokita, publicist, commentator. Jacek Bartoszek, PhD, Head of Strategy and Future. And Andrzej Krajewski, historian, independent publicist. There is an ongoing conflict, debate with Brussels. The relationship has been tense for a number of years. And I'd like to start with a general question for Mr. Rokita. What are we fighting for, in your opinion? Because this might be the question necessary to define our priorities and our possible wins. What, in your opinion, is Poland currently fighting for within the EU? Yes, I'm here. Now we can hear you, yes, and see you as well. You can start talking. That's great. Hello. Good evening. I would be happy to answer your question after modifying it slightly, if you agree. So, not what are we fighting for?
Tego rodzaju, że
Rather, what are they fighting for with us? That's what I'd say. Because Law and Justice after 2015 had no intention of going into a conflict with the EU institutions. Rather, Law and Justice was vehemently attacked from the very beginning of its existence. At the point of the whole issue of the Constitutional Court. There was a very strange legal framework created that was a basis for all kinds of steps taken against Poland for a number of years. It was about the nominees of the opposition for the the Constitutional Court. So now, years since, the question should be asked, what is the whole conflict about? Because it has spilt and extended. In my opinion, this is an idiotic question. Because it seems to me that this conflict is oftentimes wrongly defined in Poland. In my opinion, the essence of the conflict, of course it's my personal opinion, is not ideologic in its nature, rather it's political. The situation is politically simple. It's trivial, indeed. The main stream of the Polish politics has been living in fear for some time now. It started at in the times of Trump. That is, it's a fear of a possible democratic majority in the EU that will bring to power in the EU people like Salvini, Le Pen, Kaczyński, Orban, or any other representative of opposition. It's ideologically mild compared to what happened in the US, but still the ruling elite in the EU with different ideological orientations, they're very much afraid of such a possibility, and no wonder. It's imaginable in some perspective, maybe not a close one, but looking at what's happening in Europe, one could imagine a milder Trump at the helm of the European Commission or the Council or the Parliament. It seems possible. Some time ago it was impossible to believe as a possibility. So it's about weakening the opposition for that scenario not to materialize. In the case of Poland, there is very strong internal opposition against such a possibility of an outright, where it was claiming that outright is totalitarian or despotic. So that's a very strong argument against. Since a certain point recently, since the issue of financial pressure came into the picture, there has been another important political strand of the discussion, that is the discussion about the European budget. The fact that Rutte and the Dutch are currently the most vehement opponents of the Polish interests in the EU, as of today, is a result of the fact that Rutte, although he's a liberal, he is a proponent of Hayek and Friedman, wanted to limit the EU financially. That is, if there is the concept, if the concept is realistic of making the new European countries, the barbarian countries, make it suffer a bit of hunger, that's the goal. But that's a new phenomenon, that's a novelty, and in my opinion, the Dutch have little reason to involve against Poland due to outright reasons. They do have financial reasons, though. On top of that, there's the culture war that you have been discussing at this conference. And in this Poland-Brussels conflict, what seems to be important is two ideologic strands seem to be important. Both are non-left, rather liberal. First, it's the concept of jurisdiction and democracy that has been spread in Poland by the Venice Commission and the circles that have been spreading this approach, winning ever more proponents in the EU. They are convinced that only giving power to judges is a possibility to efficiently execute the common legal provisions of the community, and this is a way to transform the EU into a form of judiciary democracy, judiciary kind of technocracy. But the main strand in our conflict with the EU currently is the custom, the social norms issue and libertine aspect of the whole discussion, which is an obvious thing. The source of this is not strictly Marxist or leftist. It's all liberalized as a result of this war against Catholicism and religion, which has become a foundation of the modern liberal views in the West, where religion is seen as a form of violence. So if I were to specify the nature of the conflict, to summarize, I'd say that the most important issue is the issue of political conflict between the ruling elite, regardless of their ideological stand that has been dominant in the EU, and the European version of alt-right. The elites, are ready to do whatever it takes not to allow for alt-right taking the power in the EU. There is no talk of any compromise. Only if a European Trump takes over the EU and a European Tusk at the helm of Polish government is it possible. But then this argument will be of a completely different deal. In Poland, there are three incorrect definitions of the nature of this conflict. The fact that they are incorrect is very important because, like Socrates said, incorrect definition of the nature of things causes incorrect actions taken. So these incorrect evaluations are the following, in my opinion, while they are at the same time very widely spread. First, that it's a war on leftism. That is completely wrong as a diagnosis. If we see all inheritance of the Frankfurt School, Marcuse, etc., as leftists, that's in the absolute minority and a margin of the whole conflict of today. The opponents of Poland are Chancellor Schallenberg, who started the term with attacking Poland, Rutte, who is a proponent of Hayek and Friedman, who brings the resolution to the European Parliament and the Dutch to exert pressure on Poland to be excluded from the European circle. The problem is that Verhofstadt, who is the liberal Macron, who has nothing to do with leftism. So it's not about leftist ideologies, and it's not about leftism at all. It might be even more clearly visible in America than in Europe, although we're not discussing America at this point, where people like recently deceased John McCain are deeply convinced that Poland has become a dictatorship, and including the head of the most important think tank that has nothing to do with leftist roots. So it's not about leftists, it's not about federalists. It's not about the proponents of a superstate of Europe. At some point in the 90s in Europe, that was a stream In Christian Democrats, for example, there was this federal approach to the EU, but that's dead now. And even if federalists are there, they do not admit to being so. And there is no serious federalist European party as of today that would call for creating a European federation or any other thing of such kind. If there is any relation, then it's not between the proponents of the European state and the proponents of sovereignty. Rather, it's between the center and the province, the center and the periphery. That is, the center sees periphery as unsubordinated, as too strong, as not following the orders. A typical political problem, the problem of dominance. They do not want to force us to federalize. They want to force us to follow the orders of the center. That the periphery follows what the center says. It's a Roman mentality. You need to call for the consul and put things in order. They joined us in 2004 and now they're jumping up and kicking. What is that? I remember my conversations with representatives of other countries, member states of the EU, and always the bottom line was that you are new and you have to adapt. That's the real issue. I once wrote that this is the idea of the 21st article of the Geneva Convention, the League of Nations, that is the need for certain international mandate over countries that cannot cope on their own. And why can't they? Well, because they might elect Kaczynski, Orban, or Salvini and create a threat for other organisms. And the third incorrect definition of the problem is this is not a problem of Germany. It's very funny to hear, like yesterday, Ms. Conley said something about Poland in the Congress, and what happened straight away was comments in Poland, an automatic reaction was that she must have some relations with Germany. But that's absurd. I mean, assuming such ties is absurd, because Germany is a state that really have an interest in Poland's economic success, and they know that they made big bucks on that. They know that the extension of the EU and accession of Poland was a great success of German politics. A few days ago, Süddeutsche Zeitung, that is a Munich newspaper that is very unfriendly to Kaczynski, wrote an article in it which said that the Chancellor would have to go to Warsaw instead of Paris to manifest Germany's responsibility for Eastern Europe. That's an example of that patriarchal approach. They don't want Poland to be isolated, or to be punished, or to have budgetary or economic problems, because that resonates in the form of problems in Germany in one form or other. Our problem is not of Germany. Germany is completely secondary. One might think to what extent German dominance in terms of economy is good or bad for Poland. In any case, Germany would never strengthen that. Such a conflict. They would rather moderate the conflict, at least the elite responsible for the governance in Germany. I'm not talking about loonies, because every country has its political loonies. So this is the essence of the conflict, I'd say. Let's stop at this point, because time is running. Yes, time flies, because now it's time to talk about what should be done and what shouldn't, but I think we'll have an opportunity to do that. Next question goes to Mr. Krajewski, PhD. Let me ask what we should do or not, because the second question is where are our possible wins. So in the light of such a nature of the conflict and these political conditionalities, the question is, can we win? And if so, what can we win?
I think that the answer to this question is quite simple. We can win when it comes to the European Union, where our allies are strong enough. If we will act in isolation, we will win nothing. So we need support of other countries that may push the same thing in their own interests. And now the closest example comes from the last few days. The attempt to embed nuclear energy into the green taxonomy. In a modern country, electricity is the foundation of the country. No electricity, no country. There is no cheap electricity, and if there is no electricity, there is no industry, no additional services. Maybe the state exists, but the state is poor. For Poland, the challenge for next decade is to find an access to cheap electricity. If we don't have it, we will not prosper. There will be Greece, Italy, and Spain. These are countries that are getting poorer and poorer, and we might join them. We were lucky enough that the start window opened, so the crisis that happened in fall due to a rapid increase of the prices of gas, that motivated France to push in the European agenda nuclear power that was pushed to the margin for many years. And now it is supposed to be one element of energy of the future, and we have two paths to be taken. Either we replace coal mines and coal power plants with renewables. If not, we will have to buy gas from Russia or gas sent from Russia to Germany and resold in Poland. In Poland, the energy prices went by 80% and by 190% in Spain and Italy. What are the consequences for economy? We will see it. So it happened then in France, President Macron, who is not a great friend of Poland, quite the opposite from the very beginning of his term in office. He was one of the strongest opponent of Poland because of the protection of the French market and French transport, and suddenly it appeared that Poland and France's interests are convergent. And the interest is as follows. So as EU funds, EU loans offered by banks could be transferred without any risk to invest new nuclear reactors. And this is just the issue whether these are going to be classical nuclear power plants or new modular power plants, which are much faster, much simpler to construct. But there are still issues with the fact that these are just prototypes. But hopefully they will be developed and finalized soon, and they will operate. The Polish energy can be based on nuclear power and additionally wind farms and solar farms. And such a set might give us an opportunity to use cheap energy. If we don't follow this direction, we will have expensive electricity, provided that no other technologies are developed. But these technologies are not present yet. So it seems that we have the same interest, Poland, France, and some other countries with nuclear power plants like Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, where they modernize or expand nuclear power plants. And it seems that has already been embedded in so-called green taxonomy. And now we achieve one of the strategic goals, and the question arises, what are other directions to find such powerful allies to achieve strategic goals in the European Union? Firstly, we have to respond to the questions, what do we want? What do we want in energy? We want to maintain our chance for cheap electricity, but there are other areas. The first that comes to my mind, also with this transformation that is underway and is promoted, this is the issue of recently after the climate summit, there is an issue to stop deforestation and planting new trees, and that should be funded from the European Union, because we are supposed to stop climate change and we're supposed to limit the emission of CO2 to the atmosphere, and the forests are the best solution. They are the best natural absorber of CO2. Poland has a lot of forests, much more than any other European country. So due to that fact, it's worth thinking about creating an alliance of countries that would be interested in maintaining forests, stopping deforestation and expanding forest territories. Provided that now we are so-called green lungs of the European Union. So I'm jumping from one topic to another, but that's just an issue. It's a matter of what matters here is that we don't know the current government's priorities with regard to climate policy, because for many years the actions seem quite scattered and not connected. Poland is defensive. It doesn't get much. And we achieved a point where Poland is in a situation where European Union uses all measures of pressure, and they don't have many measures of pressure. They can cut some EU subsidies, EU funds, the Recovery and Resilience Plan. They can devoid us of votes in the European Council. So outside this pressure, the European Union has no other tools, and Poland has no other tools as well. But what is our objective? Maybe we should look for a compromise. But in order to do it, we need to put forward some thesis. But is it possible to achieve a compromise? Because having in mind what is the political reality we're living, any attempt is bombarded and the Polish government is attacked. So is it possible to achieve a compromise? In a parallel question, is it possible to govern in such reality where on one hand you talk about power sector, energy sector and forestation, but the Polish government is objected in and attacked in any case? For example, we had this dispute in Turów. The problem is that no matter what we are engaged in, we are punished by that. Yes, but when it comes to Turów, we can expect some happy end with this, and litigation will be finished, and the claim will be withdrawn, because we there is a famous saying describing a kind of stalemate. So the European Union cannot force Poland to any specific actions. Of course, there are some measure of exerting pressure because they can devoid us of money, and Poland can cope without this money. But on the other hand, Poland start some grassroots trends. The election campaign in France is a good example that everyone started to talk in France whether the French law is prevailing or the European Union law is prevailing, because maybe there's a universal issue. It's not only about a dispute between Warsaw and Brussels, but with all member states and Brussels, because if we adopt the point of view in line with Court of Justice of the European Union, that might lead to a wave of disputes in the European Union. But following that direction can cause that the scope of power of CJEU is expanded. It's like slicing salami that is getting wider and wider. Poland initiated this conflict and initiated a larger dispute about the primate of the member state law. It happened like this. It was not on purpose. It was a lucky coincidence. And now a question to Dr. Bartosiak, who have joined us as well. Doctor, you are an expert in geopolitics, and taking into account the changes on the global chessboard, I'd like to ask you about priorities that should be adopted by Poland, and thinking in the perspective not only of several years but several decades. And another questions that really surprises politicians and stops any discussions. Should we imagine functioning outside the European Union, because no institution, no organization is durable, and that stirs a lot of emotion and controversy in the Polish public debate? Thank you very much. Let me put it like this. In order to respond to this question, we need to describe the European project and try to define where are we as globally, and Poland is somewhere in between these forces. So we have to put it clearly that the European project is a project of building a European empire. So, of course, the Poles that were victims of modern history have very bad connotations with empire, but if we had to undertook this Anglo-Saxon way of understanding empire, it doesn't have to be negative. But since in 1980s, the European empire was expanded by penetration of external markets that became internal, then not peripheral, and that regarded southern countries, and then it was expanded to the east. The Germans benefited from this expansion to the east. It's very difficult to present the exact calculation, what was the benefit for the Germans. Of course, Poland benefited as well, because Poland became the peripheral country of the new empire. The whole problem was that it was founded on one single assumption, that the Americans are a global hegemon and they will stabilize global markets through their military footprint and their economic role, with the assumptions that Europe and Western country will not have such an important competitor as China. The project of capital penetration of Europe was stopped by Russia due to what happened in Crimea and in Donbas, and it has to be stated clearly. This project was stopped. To the worst, the Western countries, the Western world loses its position in the world. So that increases the structural pressure on the European empire that found itself in a recession. It appeared that the empire was good for good weather. And if there is bad political weather, it's under pressure. And there are 4 crises that take place at the same time. So the first one with regard to the structure, because if the weather is fine and we have more money, it appears we all agree. But if it's bad, we do not agree anymore. And another crisis is the crisis of power. Who decides? Who is the decision maker? And here we have a problem of Poland, of Italy, and of the Great Britain after Brexit. And of course, we have the security issues as well, and economic problems as well. The economic consists in the economic model which gets exhausted. The economic center in Germany is a great production hub that structurally uses the rest and abuses the rest of Europe, not only because it's malicious, but it's highly productive. Like Amazon, it's so good that they monopolize value chains in the United States and all around the world, destroying the competition, which is not healthy. And Germans did it with Europe. That undermines the 2 former things. It's another important issue, it's security. In the east, we have Russia. We can see what's going on our eastern border. Russia negotiates its impact on Europe in this way, so it takes its place in the European empire as it was not acknowledged in it since the fall of the Soviet Union. And we have some security issues from the south, and the Americans that compete with the Chinese, they exert some pressure on Europeans to enroll to the American camp, which affects the security position and the economic position of Europe. And Europe didn't respond to any, and the Brussels elite didn't respond to any of these challenges. In Poland, which is an average an average country, doesn't want to get subordinate to what and to surrender to what it sees. And the problem is that that's a bad news for Poland, that there is a natural dynamics and that the European project will have to get consolidated in order to prove its usefulness and to follow the direction which is dictated by the geopolitical situation, and that will impact countries like Poland. And from peripheral countries, Poland is the largest one, and Russia has quasi-imperial ambitions, and we were the force balancing these attempts for many years. So we differ from people from the Western countries because they were learning history when Poland was not present on the map, and it was visible during Prime Minister Morawiecki's visits in Brussels and in other countries. So the Western Europeans think that we should accept the place we got when entering the European Union because they control the value chains, the share of capital, because we accepted that since the 1990s and when adhering the European Union, and now we stopped accepting them anymore. And here we do not have to convince anyone. These are structural pressures, but I want to tell you that during the last few years there were some negative circumstances, and it has nothing to do with the pressure exerted over Poland. So the Americans, finding it difficult to compete with the Chinese, got to thinking, and that's still valid in Washington, that Germany cannot stay neutral in the competition with the Chinese, and they have to pay their price for that. And the Americans are ready to pay the price to the Germans, and Three Seas initiatives is also another confirmation that they are able to pay the price. And I hope that it will not be the same with nuclear power plants and nuclear energy, or with the great reform of the Polish armed forces, which is indispensable, because it will not be approved by all neighbors. Other member states will not like the solution, because Poland, thanks to a very modern and strong army, it will be a balancing power, and it will weaken the possibility of other countries influencing Polish policy and Polish politics. So with reference to what you've said, with regard to our position, the processes taking place, how Poland should project its strategy for the coming 20 or 30 years in order to, in this long-term perspective, should we follow the Brussels in the European integration, or should we turn to China or the United States, because we are perfectly aware that we can build our bilateral relationships? How do you perceive this jigsaw from the long-term perspective? What do you think? What should be the position of Poland, and what should be the next steps for us? I think that we should start balancing a bit more. I would apply a so-called strategy of being autonomous, but in the direction of anchoring. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, of course. So, anchoring and automation. We have to let them know that the decisions are made in Warsaw, only both in the direction to the US, with the US, and in cooperation with Europe, in order to be decision maker, to be the decision power, and to do so in order to choose the continental option or the American option, depending on the setting. Unfortunately, during the last few years, we were not strict enough when in relationship with the Americans. But now we have these four challenges. As there is no other place outside Europe for Poland, our future is connected to what's going to take place in our continent. As we cannot predict it, we need to have all options open. So we need to balance, and we need to be highly flexible. And at the same time, we should build strong armed forces. That's going to be a tool of security policy in the Eastern Europe, and we cannot neglect that issue. And only in such settings we will be an important player within the European Union. We have to stay within the European Union because this is our economic role. This is the formula of economic cooperation. But we need to be prepared that the European Union may not survive, and it is not because of Poland. There might be a large middle-class crisis in the European Union, and we need to be prepared for a potential war in the eastern part of Europe with all consequences. And we need to be prepared that Europe may not be unity, and that will resemble some middle-age countries connected to some extent and supervised by China, Russia, or the United States, that will set the new balance in the world. So this is a totally different political landscape that we could see during the last 30 years, and I think that the European elites are not prepared for that. That requires active protection of geopolitical setting and shaping of cooperation rules with our immediate neighborhood. But we can't afford any conflict with the European Union for sure, because 6 months ago we thought we can afford it. But the Americans will not support us because they would need the European from the continent to fight against China. The Germans won with the Americans up to now. The current government, let me just finish by that we need to survive in cooperation with the Americans, because they will get disappointed with the Germans and they will choose us. And I think it's a mistake, because the structural mix is different than in the 20th century. The Pacific countries govern and the Americans will do everything, and they will even abandon Europe in the military terms in order to win against China. And that was the geopolitical mistake and the mistake of our government during the last few years. So to finish this panel and our discussion, a question to Editor Rokita about your impressions. What Poland should do, what Polish diplomacy should do in a long-term perspective, not the short-term perspective. Dr. Bartosiak presented the threats. Dr. Krajewski mentioned that it's very difficult to indicate what is the purpose of Poland and Polish government, and in your opinion, what strategy should be adopted by Poland for the next 2 or 3 decades? We've got some problem with the connection. Please turn on your microphone. We can't hear you. Unfortunately, we can't hear you anymore. So, Editor Rokita tries without the headset, but it doesn't work. So not to waste too much time, let me ask Dr. Krajewski for your conclusions with regard to what Dr. Bartosiak said, how to build the strategy, how to develop the strategy in long-term perspective and a more difficult perspective for a decade ahead, as we cannot predict future. It's very difficult, especially at this pace of changes. So we might say, with regard to what Dr. Bartosiak said about balancing, I can see another analogy. What should we avoid? I've called it that there are some transactional areas globally. These are places where great powers fight for some influence, and they pay with resources they do not owe. So they take the benefits, the profits, but the risk and cost is somebody else. For example, the year 1938, the Western countries, the Great Britain and France, were not ready to fight in a war. They didn't win a war. They wanted to believe that Hitler just wanted some compensation for the Versailles Treaty. So they decide and they approve the partition of Czechoslovakia as a trade-off not to have wars. So Czech Republic, the Czechoslovakia was lost in a way, and Poland also benefited from that. So the Central Europe, this is a conglomeration of some minor countries, and Poland is the largest of them. And after the 1989, Poland left this transactional area, our resource for and our greatest asset for last 30 years was not used at all. Now the Western countries can defend Ukraine against some attempts on the side of Russia, but they can leave Ukraine alone if Russia offers something as a compensation. But let's assume the collapse of the European Union or countries being used for such transactions. Let us see Greece after 2015. Our strategic goal is not to lead to the situation where the Polish assets are used to settle some transactions between great political powers. I got an information that the editor Rokita joined us once again, so let me ask for your conclusions and your diagnosis and analysis. What, in your opinion, should be done by the Polish government in long-term perspective with regard to problems, challenges, and limitations that were tackled by Dr. Klejewski or Dr. Bartosiak, but also with regard to this political reality we're living in? Where, in your opinion, should we focus as Polish diplomacy? Saint Augustine said that thought requires an object. I think that we are supposed to talk about the conflict between the European Union and Brussels. But we tackled so many issues that it's very difficult to discuss. So if you ask me about long-term future, I'm not crazy enough to tell you anything about distant future because I have no idea how it's going to end up. The politics is quite vulnerable. The reality is changing. Everything went back to the classical terms, that it's very vulnerable, it's unstable, it's very difficult to talk about any great perspectives and about any stability. And Poland has two main objectives in the European Union, and we try to fulfill these objectives one way or another. So we want to become a quasi-power in the European Union and to work for postponing the ideological breakthrough that's taking place. And Poland is active on these two fields. When it comes to the first issue, is not to be a periphery country, to be a central one. And the second one is that as we are a Christian country, we want to postpone this process of Europe becoming anti-Christian. And these are two most important topics for us. But of course, this is a long-term perspective and very general. But we stand against and in front of a very practical challenge now, and it's a short-term perspective or mid-term perspective, which is much more important than any long-term strategy that we could discuss. So we need to lead to a situation where we should stop the European Union institutions from attacking Poland in many respects. I'm talking about the European Union institutions, not the European Union itself, because there is no single stance of the European Union. There are different institutions having different interests. The European Parliament is dominated by the ideological majority which is opposing the Polish government, and the European Parliament will not stop, and they will do anything to change the political power governing Poland. And this is their ultimate goal, and we have to live with that. And as Prime Minister Morawiecki goes there and he's showing his force, I think that's a good idea. And I think that Professor Legutko will get mad about this. So that has to be the price that the Polish politics pay for its presence in the European Union. But we need to lead to the situation at any cost to agree with the European Commission. Maybe a peace is not possible, but maybe some arrangement. So how to do it? Because it seems that no matter what is the direction adopted by the government, whether they wanted to confront or they were flexible, it didn't change. This is why I say that peace is impossible, but trust is possible. The politics is an art. So people having no direct experience with politics, they think there are some magic formulas. No, this is just an attempt to sculpt some shape. This is the ability, which is very practical in nature. You need to believe in politics. You need to believe that you can adopt some political measures to lead to even to the most extreme situations. I can talk about different tricks and different things that can be done by Poland that are quite effective and that could bring even better effects in the future. For example, to revert some lost cases to some other trails. In case of disciplinary chamber, we had no ally, but when it was related to the European law versus the member state law, it appeared that we have some allies. So it's good sometimes to redirect the issue. The method of a good and bad police officer, and a very old trick. The Germans wrote that Morawiecki requires some support, otherwise Ziobro will take over. And this is the worst case scenario. The worst element would take over. So his name, it wreaks havoc in the European media. So Morawiecki and Ziobro seem not to agree to be good and bad police officer, but that would be good if they agreed to that. Morawiecki lets know to his Western counterpart, he lets them know that he is endangered by the extreme right wing of the party, and that gives him another field for maneuver in the European negotiations. And third thing, the European Union and everyone who encountered the European Union institutions and leaders in practice, this is a network. You need to have some private connections with these people, because if you don't know the people, you will do nothing. So you need to have some unofficial and even private relationship, because if you don't have them, you will not get any positive response to your topics. So if you go to the summit and you present your stand, everyone is taking a look at it because they have agreed everything before, during a lunch, and they perfectly know how to follow, and they do not count with you. They do not respect you. There is no effective politics without taking revenge. I'm not able. I don't know whether we can take revenge on the Netherlands after all these acts being adopted by them. I don't know if it's possible, but if I were the Prime Minister of Poland, I would hire 3 experts in the Netherlands and ask them one question: how to do it effectively, so as Poland could take revenge on the Netherlands for everything that was adopted by the European Parliament and by the Dutch Parliament and by the Dutch Prime Minister, but not only to brag about it in the internet portals, but to do it in a clandestine way, so to do them some harm, to take revenge, and then to smile at them. We need to look for some possibility to take revenge, and I perceive the Netherlands as the very country which opposes Poland. Now the Dutch are at the forefront of fight against Poland. So I'm sorry, but I have to put the full stop maybe. Okay, let me just finish by the last sentence. I could add something more. We need to buy our friends. This is something that we learn from Jesus, to win your supporters. It's very difficult to talk business with the Germans, to agree any deals, because they force their interest. But if we talk about common interest, when we start discussion about common interest, they start to talk about their values and rules. And the French and the Macron's team, these are stakeholders. They are ready to do some business. They are mad with the Americans and with other nations, and they're looking for the opportunity to do some business. What's also important, I think Morawiecki already took steps in this direction to tempt Macron with this opportunity to construct the nuclear power plant in Poland. So as France, so as to win France as a neutral party or as an ally. If the Americans will construct this nuclear power plant in Poland, they think of us as of slaves. And they think that it's something which should be given to them. And the French will be more grateful. And there are many such examples. And these are only some examples how we can win our supporters and allies, and how we can neutralize our enemies. I understand that when it comes to our presence in the European Union, I can see some benefit in the fact, some external benefit, not an internal one. In the situation that all ministers and friends of Zbigniew Ziobro referred to referendum and poll exit, because that stirs some fierce emotions and some fear, especially in Germany, and this is something good. Of course, it's bad for the Law and Justice Party, but it's this bad police officers, so it's good on the European scale. But of course, seriously, we shouldn't leave European Union, because nobody told us ever that our presence in the European Union will be fully comfortable. Poland has its mission and should fight for its position. Okay, so let's put a full stop here about this mission of Poland in the European Union. I've been talking with Jan Marian Rokita, Jacek Bartosiak, and Andrzej Krajewski. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion, and thank you to all of you.
Dziękuję.
Dzięki.